Welcome to the deep dive. Our mission here is pretty simple. To take the most rigorous and necessary thinking from the world's sharpest minds and distill it into the core knowledge you need.
And today, we are attempting something, well, pretty ambitious.
We're trying to understand why, even when we try our absolute hardest, we keep making the same stupid mistakes.
And we're not just talking about simple lapses in judgment here. We are holding up a very, very clear mirror, one provided by Rolf Dobelli in his seminal work, The Art of Thinking Clearly.
Yeah, and if you've ever wondered why really smart people consistently fall for predictable traps, this is the deep dive for you.
That title really gets to the heart of it.
It does. Dobelli's central thesis isn't just that human reasoning is flawed, but that it is, and this is the key phrase, predictably irrational.
Right. So our errors are not just random noise. They follow these systematic, recognizable patterns. It's like we are programmed to fail in very specific ways.
And what I find so compelling about this work is that it wasn't originally designed to be some grand philosophical text.
No, not at all. It was designed really as a kind of emergency defense manual for Dobelli himself.
That origin story is so important to understanding this. It starts back in 2004 at this informal gathering in Munich. And Dobelli, who, studied business, finds himself sitting across the table from Nassim Nicholas Taleb,
Who at the time was mostly known as this esoteric trader, obsessed with statistics and philosophy.
Exactly. And Taleb points out something that just clicks for Dobelli. He says that when we fail, those systematic errors, they don't distribute themselves evenly.
Right. They pile up. They pile up in certain areas, specifically what he called the overconfidence corner.
The overconfidence corner. I love that. You just rarely see people failing due to underconfidence, but overestimation is, well, it's everywhere.
It's ubiquitous. And Dobelli just immediately saw the value in cataloging these flaws, for his own benefit, in investing, in business, in his personal life.
He created this index of pitfalls because he wanted to feel, and this is a quote, calmer and more level-headed.
It's like the difference between standing outside in a thunderstorm and, understanding the science behind the lightning.
Yeah, that's a great analogy.
The lightning itself hasn't become any less powerful, but it's become a lot less worrisome once you understand it. And that's kind of the mission here, to make our predictable irrationality just a little less worrisome.
I think we need to set the context right away, though. We are not selling some dream of cognitive perfection.
Absolutely not. If Dobelli's work tells us anything, it's that completely eliminating these errors would require superhuman willpower. It's just not the goal.
But it's because the errors persist for a reason, right? They're actually evolutionary shortcuts.
Exactly. Our brain evolved under vastly different constraints than the ones we face today.
Right. I mean, think back to our hunter-gatherer roots. Survival often depended on fast intuition, on those mental default patterns.
If the shadow shifted and the whole group just bolted, the one person who paused to conduct a rational assessment of whether it was a lion or just the wind.
That person often exited the gene pool.
Pretty quickly, yeah. A quick wrong action might cost you a few calories, maybe some embarrassment, but a slow, perfect action could cost you your life. We are the direct genetic heirs of those fast, action-oriented, and often flawed thinkers.
But the world we live in now is so different. Globalized commerce, complex financial markets, long-term planning. It severely punishes those quick, flawed decisions. So the goal for us, for you listening, is not to become some hyper-rational genius. It's to acquire what Dobelli calls insurance against too much self-induced unhappiness.
We're aiming for less irrationality, not some kind of frantic hyperactivity.
So to start fighting these errors, we have to look at how the brain first misfires when it's just trying to make sense of the world.
Specifically through faulty perception and our deep, deep need to see patterns in everything.
Okay, so let's unpack one of the most insidious errors in perception. It's the one that keeps us buying products that promise transformation but just can't deliver. It's the swimmer's body illusion.
Oh, this is a beautiful example. It's all about confusing selection effects with outcomes.
What does that mean exactly?
Well, you essentially confuse the criteria that were used to select a certain group of people with the result of the process itself.
Okay, give me an example.
The classic one is cosmetics advertising. You see an impeccably attractive model promoting a particular face cream. The story, the illusion, is that using this product is what causes the stunning complexion.
Right. Use this and you'll look like her.
But that's precisely backward. The cosmetic company is not taking average people and turning them into models.
No, they're selecting models because they already possess those qualities.
Exactly. Beauty is the selection factor, not the end result of the process.
And this error, this confusion of correlation with causation, it's so easy to see it in high-stakes decisions.
Hmm.
Take Harvard University.
Okay.
It's famous for producing these highly successful alumni. So the question is, does this mean Harvard provides a superior education that makes people successful?
Or is the success just because Harvard recruits the brightest, most ambitious, most motivated students in the world to begin with?
The quality of the incoming students is the powerful selection factor.
We confuse the selection, that rigorous entrance process, with the alleged outcome, which is the quality of the teaching.
So if you want to become a better student, maybe you don't need to get into the most exclusive university. Maybe you need to understand what habits and traits Harvard selects for in the first place.
Precisely. And Dobelli explores how this bias becomes really personal, leading to what he calls the self-illusion.
The self-illusion.
Yeah, he asks these highly content, cheerful people about the secret to their happiness. And they often gave predictable advice, always see the glass half full, or focus on the positive.
Which sounds like great advice on the surface. But what's the illusion there?
The illusion is that they genuinely believe their happiness is the result of their conscious striving and their positive thinking.
But it might not be.
It might not be. Dobelli points out that social science research strongly suggests these people may have just been born happy. Cheerfulness, they argue, is often a constant personality trait, sort of like your height.
Wait, so you're suggesting that for people who are, say, naturally inclined toward pessimism, consciously trying to be happier is kind of pointless?
That's the really sobering takeaway from the research he cites. Some social scientists have suggested that trying to become happier using these self-help slogans is as futile as trying to be taller.
Wow.
So when naturally cheerful people write self-help books, they are falling victim to the swimmer's body illusion. They think their success comes from the process they're prescribing, when really it might just be their inherent disposition.
That just shifts the whole perspective on self-improvement. The actionable insight here is pretty brutal then.
It is.
You have to be deeply suspicious when you're striving for things like abs of steel or effortless charisma if you're mistaking the people who already have those traits with the promised outcome of the system they're selling.
Right. So from what we see, let's move to what we think we see, thanks to the clustering illusion.
Ah, yes. Our brain is basically hardwired to seek patterns and rules, and if it doesn't find them, it will just invent them, especially in randomness.
It's the neurological equivalent of pareidolia, right?
Yeah.
Seeing faces in the clouds or animals in rock formations.
Exactly. It's what allowed our ancestors to spot camouflaged prey or predators. But in modern life, that same wiring just goes haywire.
It really does. The more noisy and diffuse the signal, the more certain we become that we're finding hidden messages.
There's a great anecdote in the book about a Swedish opera singer in 1957.
Oh, I remember this one.
He became convinced he was hearing supernatural whispers in the background noise of his tape recordings.
And he dedicated his entire life to it, communicating with the deceased through these electronic voice phenomena, a massive life decision based on invented patterns in random audio static.
And we see this play out all the time. The face of the Virgin Mary on a slice of toast.
Which someone bought for $28,000.
$28,000. Or, tortilla spots that resemble Jesus. These are just people projecting deeply held meaning onto random visual data.
Even things that seem scientific could be tainted by this. Remember the face on Mars?
Oh yeah, the Viking spacecraft photo from '76. It made global headlines. It looked eerily like some kind of alien monument.
But then, 25 years later, the Mars Global Surveyor sends back these high-resolution images.
And the face just dissolved into plain scree and sand dunes. The low-res image was just noisy enough to let the clustering illusion take hold in everyone's imagination.
The really dangerous implication, though, is in high-stakes fields like finance.
Right. Dobelli talks about a friend who believed he had found this non-existent pattern linking the Dow Jones and the oil price to the gold price 2 days later.
And he squandered his savings. He squandered them because he imposed a pattern onto
Yeah.
purely random, volatile data. He thought he had cracked the code to the market.
When he was really just chasing noise. The most chilling historical example of this, though, is from the Second World War. When the Germans started bombing London with V-1 rockets, Londoners were desperately trying to survive. So they carefully plotted the impact sites on maps.
And they were certain they saw clusters. They saw patterns, and they came up with theories about safe zones. Their brains were working overtime to predict where the next bomb would fall.
But the statistical analysis done after the war proved that the distribution of impacts was completely random.
Completely random. just due to the inherent inaccuracy of the V-1 rocket system.
So they were literally risking their lives, moving to areas they thought were safe, when those areas were just as likely to be hit as anywhere else.
That is just profound. The takeaway is so simple. When you think you've discovered a pattern, whether it's in a financial chart or a sports streak, first, assume it's pure chance.
You have to actively regain your skepticism.
And demand genuine, statistically significant proof before you act on that pattern.
Okay, moving on to our third bias, rooted in perception. We hit the availability bias.
This one is huge. It's the phenomenon where we overweight information that is spectacular, flashy, or loud in our minds, while we systematically downgrade things that are silent or invisible.
We think dramatically, not quantitatively.
Exactly. Information that is readily available, meaning it's vivid or recent or just easy to recall, it feels more true. And it carries this disproportionate weight in our decision-making.
This is the foundation of pretty much every anecdotal argument ever. For instance, arguing that smoking can't be that bad because your great-grandfather smoked 3 packs a day and lived to be 100.
That grandfather is an available, vivid anecdote. But when you compare that to the statistical millions who died prematurely from smoking, the anecdote is statistically useless.
It's an exception, but it's an easy one to recall.
Right. Or insisting a city is safe because my neighbor never locks their door. You're just ignoring vast amounts of crime data in favor of one easily accessible personal story.
And this becomes deeply problematic in professional settings. Dobelli points out that professionals are highly susceptible.
Oh, absolutely. Take doctors. They often fall into this trap of using favorite treatments that they know well, even if clinical data suggests more appropriate treatments exist that are just harder to recall or less familiar to them.
Or consultants. When they're faced with a totally new case outside their expertise, they just turn to their most familiar methods rather than admitting ignorance.
It's the path of least cognitive resistance. We default to what's available in our own mental toolkit.
This availability trap also just plagues corporate boardrooms.
It does. Board members tend to focus intensely on the easy-to-get, quantitative quarterly figures, the information that's right there on the spreadsheet.
But the truly critical issues are often complex, silent, or abstract. Things like subtle shifts in competition or the erosion of employee motivation.
Since those things are difficult to quantify and recall, they get consistently downgraded.
And this preference for available, even if it's wrong information, can lead to massive disasters. The book mentions the continued reliance on the Black-Scholes formula for pricing financial products.
Right, even though quantitative analysts know it's fundamentally flawed.
And a rationale.
They prefer wrong information to no information, just to have a model they can grasp.
That is an astonishing statement. Preferring a known flaw simply because it's available. That preference has cost banks billions.
The defense against it is, well, it's strenuous.
Yeah.
You have to actively seek out people who have different experiences and expertise. You have to deliberately force new, less available information into your mind to stop yourself from just relying on what's loud and easy.
Okay, let's pivot from how we perceive the world individually to how our decision-making gets distorted by the presence of others. These next biases are shaped profoundly by social pressure.
Yeah, and these reflect our deep evolutionary need to conform and to respect hierarchy. These were essential for group survival in our past.
The most common one has to be social proof, the pull of herd behavior.
This dictates that we believe an idea or a behavior is correct or appropriate or safe simply because a lot of other people are doing it.
We act like a collective, often without even thinking. You're at an intersection, a group of people suddenly stops and stares at the sky.
You look up too. Before you even consciously think about it, you look up, assuming there must be a reason.
Or spontaneous applause at a concert. Or leaving a tip just because you saw the person in front of you do it.
This herd instinct is the engine behind investment bubbles and market panics. The idea that everyone is doing it provides this psychological justification regardless of the actual facts on the ground.
W. Somerset Maugham had the perfect cynical take on this. He said, if 50 million people say something foolish, it's still foolish.
But the human brain struggles so desperately to accept that the collective could be wrong.
The classic demonstration of this is the Solomon Asch experiment from the 1950s. The task was simple. Subjects were shown lines of different lengths and asked to identify which one matched the original. The answer was obvious.
But when 5 other people, who are all actors in the experiment, unanimously gave the wrong answer.
The real subject would also answer incorrectly about 1/3 of the time.
1/3 of the time. They knew the answer was wrong, But that need for social conformity just overruled their own visual perception.
A one-third conformity rate on an obvious physical fact is just remarkable. And again, you trace this back to evolution.
If you were a hunter-gatherer and the whole group bolted, the ones who paused to rationally weigh the danger lion, rabbit, wind, they were often eliminated.
Copying the group, even if it was a false alarm, kept you alive.
And this tendency is so deeply rooted that we still use it today when there's zero survival advantage. The warning for you listening is to be deeply skeptical whenever a company or a politician justifies an action based purely on popularity.
High sales volume is not proof of quality.
It is merely proof of high sales volume.
Related to conformity is the powerful authority bias. This is our deeply ingrained tendency to distort our judgment based purely on the prestige or status or title of a figure.
We grant instant credibility to experts, even when their track records are, frankly, horrifying.
Dobelli forces us to look at the recent past, the 2008 financial crisis.
Right.
There are hundreds of thousands, maybe a million trained economists in the world. Yet, as the book notes, not one of them could accurately predict the timing of that collapse.
Never has a group of experts failed so spectacularly, and yet their authority remains largely intact.
Or look at history. Until about 1900, if you were sick, it was often wiser to avoid a doctor's visit because the standard medical practices of the day, poor hygiene, bloodletting, often did more harm than good.
Yet we still afford modern doctors this immediate high status, often overriding our own common sense.
The extreme power of this bias was shown, of course, in the terrifying Milgram experiment in 1961.
Yeah.
Participants were instructed by a professor to administer increasing electrical shocks to a learner behind glass up to a seemingly lethal 450 volts.
And the learner, who was an actor, would writhe in pain, scream, and eventually fall silent. When the subject wanted to stop, the professor in charge would just give these authoritative prompts like, "The experiment requires that you continue."
The results were just devastating. More than half of the participants continued up to the maximum voltage.
Just out of obedience to the professor's authority. The setting, the status, the lab coat. It completely overrode the subject's moral judgment.
This bias even shows up in life or death situations, like aviation. Historically, the captain was king, and a co-pilot wouldn't dare question an oversight, which led to avoidable crashes.
That failure forced a change. The book notes that airlines instituted Crew Resource Management, or CRM.
Right, which coaches flight crews to openly and quickly discuss any reservations they have. It's effectively deprogramming the authority bias.
And that systematic deprogramming has contributed more to flight safety in the last 2 decades than technical advances have.
So the ultimate mitigation is structural. When you encounter an authority, you have to do your best to challenge their reasoning, not their person. And if you're in charge, you have to create systems that make it safe for people to disagree with you.
Before we move on, we have to quickly touch on the social compulsion known as reciprocity, or the giving trap.
Ah, yes. The struggle we have with being in another person's debt.
It's a powerful evolutionary strategy for cooperation, anyway.
Yeah.
If I share my food with you today, you feel compelled to return the favor tomorrow. It ensures mutual survival.
But in the modern world, it becomes this easily exploitable psychological vulnerability.
The infamous example is the Hare Krishna sect. They were extremely effective in airports by offering a gift, usually a small flower.
And if you accepted it, your bad conscience made you highly susceptible to their immediate follow-up request for a donation.
It's a gentle psychological blackmail. Philanthropic organizations use the same trick. They send you an envelope full of unsolicited address labels or postcards, assuring you they're a gift to keep.
They're forcing you into a perceived debt.
Exactly. And Dobelli makes it clear this leads to really tedious social exchanges. The pressure of reciprocity compels us to accept and extend tiresome invitations, leading to these vicious cycles.
You accept a dinner invite from a couple you find far from entertaining,
Then you feel obliged to invite them back, enduring a second tedious evening.
which then compels them to invite you back again.
It's this compulsion to repay social debt that's so strong we often find ourselves enduring these wearisome cycles we just wish we could escape.
So the simple advice is, if someone approaches you with an unsolicited gift, just refuse it unless you genuinely want to enter that cycle of obligation.
Okay, let's shift gears. Let's get into the errors that prioritize our comfort, our ego, and our immediate desire for action over cold, hard facts. These are the biases driven by emotional or impulsive reasoning.
And we have to start with the true heavy hitter here, the confirmation bias. It's often called the mother of all misconceptions.
It really is. It's the tendency to interpret any new information to fit your existing beliefs while actively filtering out any disconfirming evidence.
It's the ultimate ego protector. If Gil is convinced his fad diet is the best in the world, any weight loss he achieves confirms the diet works.
Right. And any weight gain is immediately dismissed as a normal fluctuation or a hiccup or an exception.
The belief system stays intact because the brain acts like a lawyer, not a scientist. It just searches for evidence to support the conclusion it's already reached.
As Aldous Huxley said, facts do not cease to exist because they are ignored. But we ignore them anyway, systematically.
In the business world, you see this when executive teams decide on a new, high-stakes strategy. From that point on, they enthusiastically celebrate any confirming sign.
And indications to the contrary, sales dipping in a test market, a competitor's innovation, they're quickly dismissed as exceptions.
Warren Buffett puts it perfectly. What the human being is best at doing is interpreting all new information so that their prior conclusions remain intact. We are masters of self-deception.
The defense against this bias is maybe the most difficult because it requires an intellectual honesty that's almost painful. Charles Darwin perfected this defense.
How so?
Darwin systematically fought the confirmation bias his whole life. He developed the habit of immediately writing down any observation that contradicted his theory of evolution.
He knew his brain would actively forget it otherwise.
Exactly. He knew the brain forgets disconfirming evidence quickly, so he had to record it to force himself to reckon with it later.
Think about that. The more certain Darwin became of his theory, the more actively he looked for contradictions.
So for you listening, the practical takeaway is powerful. Prick up your ears whenever you hear the word exception. It is often the camouflage for critical, disconfirming evidence that your brain is trying to throw away.
Okay, let's talk about an urge that often leads us to bad decisions. The compulsion to act. This is the action bias.
Right, the psychological urgency to act, especially in new or unclear situations, even when patient inaction is statistically the rational choice.
And this often pairs up with the sunk cost fallacy, where we feel we have to continue a losing endeavor just because of the costs we've already sunk into it.
We feel this tremendous pressure to just do something. The classic illustration is with soccer goalkeepers during penalty kicks.
Okay.
Statistical analysis shows that players shoot roughly 1/3 of the time to the left, 1/3 to the right, and 1/3 right down the middle.
So logically, the keeper should stay in the center about a third of the time to maximize their chances.
But studies show they almost never do. They stay in the middle less than 7% of the time. They dive left or right almost every single time.
Wow. Because diving looks proactive. It looks impressive. It feels less embarrassing than just freezing on the spot and watching the ball sail past you.
The action bias makes them act, even if that action leads to a statistically worse outcome. It's about optics and self-image.
You see this with investors, too. They show this hyperactivity when they start out, believing they have to constantly be buying and selling and adjusting their portfolio.
Even affects the emergency services. Less experienced police officers often intervene too quickly in a confusing brawl, which can lead to more casualties than if a senior officer had just monitored the scene from a distance, exercising patient inaction.
The cure, as prescribed by Charlie Munger, is the perfect antidote. He says to avoid just doing any damn thing just because you can't stand inactivity.
Sometimes the most important and rational choice is to simply wait and observe.
Finally, in this section, we turn to a persistent systematic failure that plagues every corporate project and every home renovation.
The planning fallacy. This is the systematic and, frankly, absurdly ambitious underestimation of the time, costs, and complexity needed to complete a task.
And what's so frustrating is that it plagues even experienced people who know, empirically, that they always miss deadlines.
They fall for it every single time they start a new plan.
Dobelli references a telling study where Canadian psychologists asked students submitting their final theses to specify a realistic deadline and a worst-case scenario date.
The results were just humbling. On average, the students needed 50% more time than their realistic deadline.
And a full 7 days more than even their worst-case scenario date. They couldn't even accurately predict their own failure.
And the problem just gets worse when people work together. Collaboration doesn't magically make the planning more accurate, it just compounds the initial optimism.
Everyone is so keen to show momentum and ambition that they refuse to anchor their predictions in actual historical data.
The planning fallacy is just confirmation bias applying to the future. We only look for evidence that confirms our optimistic timeline is achievable, and we filter out all evidence of potential setbacks.
So we have spent a good chunk of time cataloging all these systematic flaws. Our evolutionary baggage in a modern suit?
But Dobelli's work isn't just a list of problems, it's a toolkit for developing defensive habits. This brings us to the practical strategies for clearer reasoning.
Right. And the first core strategy is learning to engage the slow, reflective thinking system, the rational, deliberate system, instead of just relying on our fast, intuitive responses.
Our brain defaults to the intuitive mind because it's swift and it saves energy. Rational thinking, on the other hand, is slow, demanding, and it's a huge energy guzzler. And crucially, we have a limited supply of that rational energy.
Which leads us directly to decision fatigue. Willpower is like a limited battery that gets drained by making constant choices all day long.
And when that battery is low, our brain conserves energy by making poor, impulsive, easy choices.
This is why IKEA puts its restaurants right in the middle of the store.
Yeah, they know decision fatigue is setting in after you've navigated dozens of showrooms. They need you to replenish your blood sugar before you continue shopping. Otherwise, you might just give up.
The most dramatic example of decision fatigue, though, comes from a study of Israeli judges deciding on early parole requests.
This one is amazing. The researchers track the judges' decisions throughout the day.
At the beginning of the day, right after a meal, the judges were granting early parole at a pretty high rate, around 65%.
But as the day wore on, that rate just plummeted to near zero, only to jump right back up immediately after a meal break.
Their decisions were not based on the severity of the crime, but on their blood sugar levels and the resulting decision fatigue.
That's a profound demonstration of how our physiological state influences high-stakes justice. The practical tip is so clear.
Plan important, high-consequence decisions, like negotiations or complex analysis, for the morning or right after lunch when your willpower is refreshed. Never make a major decision when you're mentally exhausted or hungry.
This also means being aware of how our judgments get manipulated by comparison. It's called the contrast effect.
We struggle desperately with absolute judgments. Instead, we judge something based on what came immediately before it.
Right, so ordering $3,000 leather seats or a premium sound system seems cheap when you're already buying a $60,000 luxury car.
The high initial anchor makes the expensive add-ons feel negligible by contrast. Every industry that offers upgrades exploits this brilliantly.
And remember that classic study? People are willing to walk 10 minutes across a parking lot to save $10 on a $20 meal.
But they wouldn't walk 10 minutes to save $10 on a $1,000 suit.
Logically, 10 minutes is 10 minutes and $10 is $10.
Mm.
But the relative contrast of 50% saving versus a 1% saving, it changes our perception of value and makes us act irrationally.
Okay, our second key strategy. Using structured analysis to counter emotional or social influences, especially those related to group dynamics and authority.
Right. To counter the authority bias, we have to institute conscious systems, like the crew resource management in aviation we talked about, that allow for dissent.
If you're leading a team, you should consider appointing a devil's advocate.
Someone whose official job is to criticize the plan and point out the flaws, just to avoid the dangers of groupthink.
And we have to actively question our first impressions by being aware of the primacy and recency effects.
This is the tendency for the information presented first, the primacy or the information presented last recency, to disproportionately influence our overall judgment.
It colors everything in between.
Consider the two descriptions of two fictional people, Alan and Ben. Alan is described as smart, hardworking, impulsive, critical, stubborn, and jealous.
And Ben is described with the exact same traits, but starting with jealous, stubborn, and critical.
Most people prefer Alan, even though the factual information is identical. The positive traits presented first create this strong initial impression, a primacy effect, that just outweighs the negative ones.
This is why companies spend obscene amounts of money on luxurious entrance halls and lobbies.
Or why consultants and lawyers show up to meetings in impeccably tailored suits. It's an attempt to manage that powerful initial impression.
So what's the practical defense, especially in contexts like recruiting or grading?
You have to randomize the order of inputs.
Yeah.
The Nobel laureate Daniel Kahneman realized he was grading exams unfairly, favoring students who answered the first questions flawlessly, regardless of how they did on later questions.
So his solution was to grade the individual questions in big batches across all the students.
Elegant and effective. It canceled out the primacy effect that was biasing him. You have to neutralize the order in which you receive information.
Finally, let's talk about isolating actual evidence and avoiding the search for patterns and noise, our third overall strategy.
We've already detailed Darwin's rigorous method, but it's worth repeating. To fight confirmation bias, you must actively and immediately write down disconfirming evidence. Never trust your memory to hold on to inconvenient truths.
To mitigate the clustering illusion, the immediate assumption has to be pure chance.
Right. If you think you've found a reliable pattern in stock market data or a run of good luck, assume it is noise until it is statistically proven otherwise. It's about building a foundation of deep skepticism.
And to overcome the availability trap, the antidote is sociological.
You must actively seek out and spend time with people who have different experiences and expertise than you do. You cannot let your personal vivid anecdotes substitute for objective, quantitative data.
This also means understanding the dangers of information bias and resisting the urge for information overload.
The delusion that more information guarantees better decisions is a pervasive modern myth.
Dobelli references a whimsical story by Jorge Luis Borges about a country that creates a map with a scale of 1 to 1.
A map as large as the country itself. It's useless. It provides no insight because it just duplicates what they already know.
That's the extreme case of information bias. Additional information doesn't just waste time and money. It can put you at a disadvantage by cluttering your focus.
We need to focus on the bare, essential facts needed to make a choice and resist the urge to research endlessly. As the historian Daniel Boorstin noted, the greatest obstacle to discovery is not ignorance. It's the illusion of knowledge.
Having too much information can give you the illusion of competence without providing any actual clarity.
So, we've cataloged the systematic flaws in our thinking, their deep evolutionary origins, and some concrete practical defenses. Now, how do we synthesize all this and turn this recognition into a lifelong habit?
The synthesis is realizing that recognition matters more than anything else.
I think so. Just identifying these biases, putting names to the faces of our systematic errors, that's the foundation of rational decision-making. It allows you to anticipate and manage your own flaws.
And, just as importantly, to recognize them in the sales pitches, political arguments, and media narratives of others.
This brings us back to advice championed by Dobelli, which comes from Charlie Munger, the circle of competence.
Right. Munger argues it's not terribly important how big your circle of competence is, the areas you truly understand.
But it is terribly important that you know where the perimeter is.
Mm.
You have to know exactly what you understand intuitively and where you only partially comprehend things.
And when you're operating outside that perimeter,
That's when you must use slow, rational, deliberate thinking. You have to pull out the checklist of predictable errors and check yourself.
for high-consequence decisions, the ones that really move the needle in your life, Dobelli's personal system is to be as rational as possible. He approaches the decision like a pilot before takeoff, using a pre-flight checklist.
He examines the errors one by one. And this deliberate analysis counters our natural inclination to just decide intuitively and then, after the fact, construct this beautiful, rational story to justify that choice.
We're trying to stop being lawyers arguing a predetermined case.
And start acting like scientists, questioning everything. Ultimately, this deep dive shows that physically and cognitively, we are still hunter-gatherers in modern clothes.
Our brains were beautifully optimized for a simple, stable environment, but the world we've built is complex, fast, and highly interdependent.
And in this modern, complicated world, the rewards increasingly flow to single-minded contemplation and independent action, not to herd behavior or fast, intuitive leaps.
The goal is to develop sober, deliberate analysis as a lifelong habit.
So here's the final provocative thought for you. Think about one single high-stakes decision in your life right now. A major career change, a significant investment, a relationship milestone that you are currently relying heavily on intuition or social pressure for.
Now that you have this checklist of predictable, systematic errors, how would this list change your approach to that single critical decision?
Something to mull over until our next deep dive.